The 13th century was a time of fire, ash, and the thunder of hooves. Across the known world, from the rice paddies of China to the stone castle of Eastern Europe, a single shadow had lengthened until it eclipsed the sun. This was the age of the Mongol Empire. To the people of the time, the Mongols were not merely an army, they were a force of nature, a cataclysm sent by the Huns to scour the earth. They had toppled the caliphate in Baghdad, burning the House of Wisdom, and turning the Tigris River black with ink and red with blood. They had crushed the Rus, swept through Persia, and brought the mighty Song dynasty to its knees. Their reputation preceded them like a dark wind. They were undefeated. They were inevitable. They were the end of the world. But in the waning years of that violent century, specifically, in the year 1299, this unstoppable force collided with an immovable object. The location was not a famous European capital or a Chinese metropolis, but a dusty plain just outside the city of Delhi known as Kili. Here, the narrative of Mongol invincibility would face its sternest test. Here, the history of the Indian subcontinent would hang by the finest of threads. This is the story of a clash that defined the future of South Asia. A battle where the sheer terror of the Mongol war machine was met not with submission, but with a ferocity that stunned the conquerors. This is the story of how the tide was turned. To understand the magnitude of what happened at Kili, we must first understand the state of the world in 1299. The Mongol Empire, founded by Genghis Khan, had fractured into four massive khanates, yet each remained a superpower in its own right. The Chagatai Khanate, which controlled Central Asia, looked southward with hungry eyes. For decades, they had raided the borders of India. These were usually smash-and-grab operations, lightning-fast strikes designed to plunder wealth, capture slaves, and vanish back into the mountain passes of Afghanistan before organized resistance could form. The people of the Punjab and the frontier provinces lived in a state of perpetual anxiety, their horizons forever scanned for the dust clouds that signaled doom. However, the invasion of 1299 was different. This was not a raid. This was an existential threat. The ruler of the Chagatai Khanate, Dua Khan, had dispatched his son, Kutlu Khwaja, with a singular purpose. He gave him an army that historians estimate ranged anywhere from 50,000 to 200,000 horsemen. Regardless of the exact number, it was a force of staggering magnitude. A city on the move, equipped not for looting, but for conquest. Their objective was not the border towns. They did not stop to besiege the great forts of Multan or Lahore. They bypassed them entirely, flowing around the Indian defenses like water around a stone. Their eyes were fixed on the heart. They were coming for Delhi. Inside Delhi sat a ruler who was as complex as he was ruthless. Alauddin Khilji had ascended the throne of the Delhi Sultanate only a few years prior, in 1296. His rise to power was steeped in blood. He had assassinated his own uncle and father-in-law to seize the crown. Alauddin was a man of boundless ambition, a military genius, and a tyrant who ruled with an iron fist. He was not a man to be loved, but he was a man to be feared, and in 1299, fear was the only currency that mattered. He saw himself as a second Alexander, a world conqueror in the making. But before he could conquer the world, he had to save his own kingdom. News of the Mongol advance reached Delhi, causing a panic that bordered on mass hysteria. The countryside collapsed. Refugees poured into the capital by the tens of thousands, fleeing the approaching storm. The streets of Delhi became choked with carts, livestock, and terrified families. Food prices skyrocketed. Water became scarce. The air was thick with the dust of the displaced and the murmurs of impending doom. The Mongols were known to depopulate entire regions, to build pyramids of skulls as warnings to those who resisted. The people of Delhi believed their end had come. It is in this atmosphere of suffocating dread that we witness one of the most pivotal war councils in history. Alauddin gathered his nobles, his generals, and his most trusted advisors. The mood in the royal chamber was grim. The consensus among the elite was unanimous: do not fight. The sheer size of the Mongol army was overwhelming. The advisors, led by the loyal and prudent Alal-Mak, the Kotwal of Delhi, urged the Sultan to adopt a defensive posture. They advised him to lock the gates, man the ramparts, and wait. They argued that the Mongols, deep in enemy territory with overextended supply lines, would eventually run out of food and retreat. To meet them in the open field, they argued, was suicide. This was the conventional wisdom. It was the safe choice. It was the choice most rulers would have made. But Alauddin Khilji was not most rulers. He listened to his advisors, his face unreadable, before rising to deliver a rebuttal that has echoed through the corridors of history. He rejected the idea of hiding behind walls. He argued that a king who hides from his enemies loses not just his territory, but his authority to rule. If he cowered in Delhi while the Mongols ravaged his lands, he would be seen as weak, and in the Shark Tank of Delhi politics, weakness was a death sentence. He declared that he would march out to Kili to meet the enemy head-on. He famously stated that he would leave the outcome to God, but he would not leave his honor behind the city gates. The order was given. The granaries were opened to feed the soldiers. The armories were emptied. Alauddin marched his forces out of the safety of Delhi and established his camp at Kili, a vast plain located only a short distance from the city. The proximity to the capital raised the stakes even higher. If the army broke at Kili, there would be no time to regroup, no second line of defense. The Mongols would be in Delhi within hours. The two armies that faced each other across the plain of Kili represented two diametrically opposed philosophies of warfare. On one side were the Mongols, the masters of mobility. Their army was composed almost entirely of light cavalry horse archers, capable of shooting with deadly accuracy while riding at full gallop. They were fluid, elusive, and disciplined. They fought like a pack of wolves, using feigned retreats to lure enemies out of position before encircling and destroying them. They wore silk undershirts to mitigate arrow wounds and carried dried meat and curd to sustain them on long campaigns. They were a machine built for speed and slaughter. Opposing them was the army of the Delhi Sultanate. This was a heavy, industrial force. Alauddin's army relied on heavy cavalry, men clad in chainmail and plate, riding larger, more powerful horses than the Mongol ponies. They were armed with maces, swords, and spears, designed for the shock of close-quarters combat. But the centerpiece of the Indian army, the weapon that the Mongols respected and feared, was the war elephant. Alauddin fielded hundreds of these beasts, armored in steel and trained to trample and gore. The elephants were the tanks of the medieval world. They acted as mobile fortresses, breaking enemy lines and terrifying horses. The battlefield deployment was standard for the time. Alauddin commanded the center, the heart of the army, surrounded by his elite guards and the royal elephants. On his left wing, he placed his trusted brother, Ulugh Khan. On the right wing was the hero of the day, a general named Zafar Khan. Zafar Khan is a figure who straddles the line between history and legend. He was known for his immense physical strength and his reckless bravery. He had fought the Mongols before and held them in contempt. He was the tip of Alauddin's spear. The battle began not with a chaotic charge, but with the tense, terrifying chess match of maneuver. The Mongols, led by Kutlug Khwaja, tested the Indian lines. Arrows flew in dark clouds, darkening the sky. The sound was deafening, the trumpeting of elephants, the thunder of drums, the screams of men and horses. The Mongols tried to provoke the Indians, to draw them out of their disciplined formation. They knew that if they could separate the heavy cavalry from the support of the elephants and infantry, they could pick them apart. It was on the right wing that the battle exploded into chaos. Zafar Khan, seeing the Mongol left wing maneuvering, could no longer restrain himself. Whether he disobeyed orders or simply seized a tactical opening remained a subject of historical debate, but the result was the same. Zafar Khan ordered a full charge. His heavy cavalry thundered across the plain, crashing into the Mongol line with the force of a landslide. The impact was devastating. The Mongol light cavalry, for all their speed, could not withstand the direct impact of the heavy Indian horsemen. Zafar Khan smashed through their front lines, shattering their formation. The Mongols broke. They turned and fled. Zafar Khan, flushed with the heat of success, and perhaps blinded by his own bravery, gave chase. He pursued them for miles, driving them away from the main battlefield. It seemed like a glorious victory. But Zafar Khan had fallen for the oldest Mongol trick in the book, the feigned retreat. As he chased the fleeing enemy, he became separated from the main body of Alauddin's army. He had outrun his support. He had outrun the elephants. Suddenly, the fleeing Mongols stopped. They wheeled their horses around. At the same time, a fresh Tumana unit of 10,000 Mongol soldiers who had been lying in ambush emerged from the terrain, cutting off Zafar Khan's retreat. He was surrounded. The trap had snapped shut. The scene that followed is one of the most dramatic last stands in Indian history. Zafar Khan and his men were encircled by a sea of Mongol archers. The arrows rained down on them from all sides. His men fell by the hundreds. Zafar Khan's horse was shot out from under him. He continued to fight on foot, wielding his weapons with such ferocity that even the Mongols, who valued martial prowess above all else, paused in awe. Legend says that the Mongol commander offered Zafar Khan a chance to surrender, promising him a high rank in the Mongol army. Why? Zafar Khan refused. He died fighting, taking a multitude of enemies with him. The death of Zafar Khan was a tragedy for the Delhi Sultanate, but it served a crucial strategic purpose. His ferocious charge and the subsequent desperate struggle had shaken the Mongol army. They had won the skirmish on the right wing, but they had paid a heavy price in blood and energy. Moreover, the sheer aggression displayed by the Indian forces contradicted everything the Mongols expected. They were used to enemies who fled, enemies who broke at the first sign of encirclement. Here was an enemy that fought to the last breath. Night fell over the plain of Kili. The two armies returned to their camps. The situation was tense. Zafar Khan was dead. The right wing of the Indian army was decimated. Alauddin Khalji held the center and the left, but the loss of his greatest general was a severe psychological blow. The advisors whispered again of retreat, of withdrawing behind the walls of Delhi under the cover of darkness. But as the sun rose the next morning, a miracle occurred. The sentries on the walls of Delhi and the scouts in the Indian camp looked out across the plain and saw nothing. The vast Mongol host, which had threatened to swallow India whole, was gone. They had packed up their tents in the dead of night and retreated. Historians have debated for centuries why Kutlug Khwaja turned back. Some argue that the death of Zafar Khan had actually terrified the Mongols. If one general could fight like that, what would the Sultan himself do? Others suggest that Kutlug Khwaja had been wounded in the battle and could not lead the campaign further. There are theories that the Mongols, having lost many men in the ambush of Zafar Khan, realized they lacked the number to effectively besiege the heavily fortified city of Delhi while a hostile army still remained in the field. The heavy cavalry and elephants of Alauddin had proven to be a counter to their light horse archers that they were not prepared to face in a prolonged war of attrition. Whatever the reason, the retreat was real. The cloud of doom that had hung over the subcontinent dissipated. Delhi was saved. But the Battle of Kili was more than just a lucky escape. It was a wake-up call that fundamentally transformed the Indian state. Alauddin Khalji, having stared into the abyss, realized that the current system of governance was insufficient to protect his empire from the Mongol threat. He understood that this was not the last time they would come to defeat a machine. He had to build a machine. In the aftermath of Kili, Alauddin initiated a series of radical military and economic reforms that were centuries ahead of their time. He realized that to fight the Mongols, he needed a massive standing army, not feudal levies loyal to local lords, but professional soldiers loyal only to the state. But a massive standing army cost money, more money than the treasury possessed. To solve this, Alauddin turned the economy of the Delhi Sultanate into a command economy. He instituted strict price controls on all essential commodities: wheat, rice, sugar, cloth, and horses. The prices were fixed by the state. He established government granaries to store food, ensuring that the army and the citizens could be fed even during droughts or sieges. He created a vast network of spies to ensure that merchants did not hoard goods or sell above the fixed price. The punishment for violating these economic laws was brutal and immediate. He also reformed the military administration. He introduced the system of chehra, a detailed description of every soldier to prevent fraud, and dug, the branding of horses to ensure that the cavalry was using high-quality mounts provided by the state. He repaired the old forts along the frontier and built new ones, garrisoning them with his best troops and equipping them with heavy weaponry. These reforms turned the Delhi Sultanate into a militarized state designed for one purpose: total war against the Mongols. And it worked. The Mongols did return. They came again in 1303, 1305 and 1306, but every time they came, they found the Indian defenses stronger. They found an army that was better paid, better equipped, and better led. The psychological edge that the Mongols had enjoyed, the myth of their invincibility, had been shattered at Kili. They were no longer demons, they were just men, and they could be killed. The Battle of Kili is often overlooked in the grand scope of world history, overshadowed by the Mongol campaigns in the Middle East and Europe. Yet, its significance cannot be overstated. If Alauddin Khalji had listened to his advisors and holed up in Delhi, the city likely would have fallen eventually. The Mongols would have sacked the capital, and the political structure of North India would have disintegrated. The cultural, religious, and political landscape of the subcontinent would have been irrevocably altered. India might have become another Khanate. Integrated into the Mongol sphere of influence, its trajectory shifted towards Central Asia rather than developing its own unique Indo-Islamic synthesis. Kili was the moment when the wave broke. It was the moment when the indigenous military traditions of India, combined with the strategic ruthlessness of the Khalji dynasty, proved capable of halting the greatest war machine the world had ever seen. It demonstrated that the Mongols could be beaten in the open field, not just through attrition or geography, but through force of arms and strength of will. The legacy of Kili is written in the survival of Delhi. It is written in the administrative systems that later Indian Empire, including the Mughals and even the British, would study and adapt. But mostly, it is a testament to the power of leadership in the face of annihilation. When the sky turned black with arrows and the horizon filled with enemies, the refusal to yield changed the course of history. The Mongols, who had made the world fear them, finally learned to fear the resolve of India. As we look back on the dusty plain of Kili, now lost to the sprawl of modern civilization, we must remember the thunder of that day. We must remember the elephants standing like rocks in the tide, the glitter of mail in the harsh sun, and the solitary, doomed charge of Zafar Khan. It was a day of blood and iron. A day